title of Adam's talk is Just a Cupbearer? Was that good enough, Adam? Okay. And so we'll turn it over to Brother Adam.
Good morning. Thank you for the encouraging response, the enthusiastic. It's always good to have some enthusiasm going on in the morning. So recently, a lot of people have been asking me, how's my new job been going? And, I've been in a new job for 3-4 months now. I like to tell everyone I've been in a new job for 3-4 months. And because I like to tell everyone always wants to know, how's it going? So I have been in 10 different departments within Now Foods. Great company, if you haven't heard of it. I can give you some good products from there. And every time I've been within a new department, people are always asking, all right, which department did you like? Which was the easiest? Which was the hardest? Is something good about it? How's it going? How's it going? And, thinking about the type of jobs that I was in, and thinking, okay, there are some which, you walk in, you clock in, you can not even have to think about what you're doing, just get the work done. And my current role, you have to be very smart. And I'm not necessarily as smart in that degree, so it takes me some time. But I have to really focus on what's going on. So there's different levels to each job. And then thinking about myself kind of got me thinking about different jobs in the Bible. So we have like Pharisees, we have priests, we have shepherds, we have tent makers, we have like blacksmiths. There's so many different occupations within the Bible. And then as I'm going through these, I noticed one which kind of didn't stick out to me at first. And I've always heard, the rumors saying, oh, just a cupbearer. There's more than meets the eye to being a cupbearer. But what exactly is a cupbearer? Because it can get a lot pretty deep. And actually, believe it or not, I had some water prepared for me earlier, but I don't know if it's truly safe for me to test. So I actually need someone that I can really trust to go and try some water. And I think that I'm going to ask the person that once called me her favorite uncle. So that would be Joanna. And because this is live, people can know that Joanna has called me her favorite uncle on recording. So Joanna, if you can help me out for a second. Because right here I have 2 cups of water. One is, or I believe they're both water. I'm not really sure. But what I need you to do is to take a sip out of each one and tell me which is the good water for me to drink. Okay? Okay. You? So which one was the good water? This one? All right, so I'm going to try it, and if I don't get poisoned, then I'll reward you greatly afterwards, okay? All right, so I'm going to try it. Good water. Thank you, Joanna, for being very trustworthy. I'll work something out with you later. So, all right, so you're good to go. Thank you. So that level of trust and confidence I just had with Joanna right there is similar to what a cupbearer had back then. So a cupbearer would prepare the cup for the king. And mostly that cup was a cup of wine. And what made that position so important was the amount of poison attempts made on the king. Because it is very commonplace if just one person doesn't like the king, they're going to try and get rid of him. And a common way of that was poison. So because of that, the king had a very trusted person, which they would appoint as cupbearer to the king. And that cupbearer would present the wine and would sometimes even taste the wine as well to make sure that it was suitable for the king. And knowing that a cupbearer would have to possibly try out the wine would make them ensure that the wine was good for the king. And it's this level of trust which is very important back then, because it was a position of trust. It's also a position of great power as well, being one of the few people to be close to the king. You have to have a lot of loyalty. You have to be loyal to the king where the king can trust you. It's also a position of great honor as well, which to me was always such confusing. It's a position of honor. Giving wine to someone else is a position of honor, but that's what it was. And a good example of that is, and I will say, so the title of cupbearer is mentioned 3 times, and it's mentioned kind of one other time as like a repska, as like the leader of the cupbearers, if it's translated, but we're not going to go into that. But one of the first times it's mentioned, speaking of kind of honor, is in 2 Chronicles 9, verses 3 to 4. So that's 2 Chronicles chapter 9 at verses 3 through 4. It's talking about the Queen of Sheba. When the Queen of Sheba saw the wisdom of Solomon, as well as the palace he had built, the food on his table, the seating of his officials, the attending servants in their robes, the cupbearers in their robes, and the burnt offerings he made at the temple of the Lord, she was overwhelmed. So here, cupbearers, it's mentioned separately from the servants, mentioned separately from the officials. And that is very key to note, because it's mentioned along with all of the riches of Solomon. And you don't normally think of a cupbearer being associated with riches, but here it is. When Solomon is displaying his power, cupbearers are mentioned there as well, because it has an important significance to Solomon, that level of trust that he's willing to present them to the Queen of Sheba. It shows how important cupbearers are and how they have power and the honor that is associated with that title. Another example of cupbearers, which is earlier on in the Bible, back in Genesis, so Genesis 40. And this is the story of Joseph in jail. And Joseph was in jail with 2 different people. One was a cupbearer and one was a baker. So I'll start at Genesis 40, 1 through 3, and I'll skip around to chapter 41 afterwards. But Genesis 40, the first couple verses. Sometime later, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his 2 officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and put them in custody of the house of the captain of the guard in the same prison where Joseph was confined. And then jumping ahead to chapter 41, starting at verse 9 through 14. So let's start. We had the cupbearer and the baker in prison. And as you know, there's a whole chapter right now, which we won't go into, but where Joseph is able to interpret both the dreams of the cupbearer and the baker. And the cupbearer's dream was favorable. He was able to return back to Pharaoh's court. And here, back in chapter 41, when Pharaoh's having his own dream, the cupbearer has a response. At 41, starting at verse 9, then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, "Today I am reminded of my shortcomings. Pharaoh was once angry with his servants, and he imprisoned me and the chief baker in the house of the captain of the guard. Each of us had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. Now a young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. We told him our dreams, and he interpreted them for us, giving each man the interpretation of his dream. And things turned out exactly as he interpreted them to us. I was restored to my position, and the other man was impaled." So Pharaoh sent for Joseph quickly, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. When he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. So in these couple of verses, especially back in Genesis 40, it said that the cupbearer and the baker had offended the king. There's a couple different translations of the word offended, and different interpretations of that specific word. But offended could mean conspired to overthrow the king, where you have the baker who's in charge of the food and the cupbearer who is in charge of presenting the wine. And if you're looking to poison, you want to cover your bases with both food and drink. So that is an alternative of kind of that conspiracy of why they were they were thrown into prison because they offended the king. Yet, because of that, but even with that, the cupbearer was the only one to have his power restored after Joseph was able to interpret his dream. And that in itself could be fine, but Joseph had asked the cupbearer to remember him as soon as he got out of jail. But the cupbearer did not. He forgot about him because he was so excited, and this is kind of speculation, but so excited to return to Pharaoh's court that he kind of forgets. And it could be part of, the human nature to forget, or it could be part of God's plan so that way he could show his power and work in any way. But even after the chief cupbearer forgets immediately, it goes 2 years where he forgets. And then when this other situation comes up, he remembers. And because he remembers him in a time of need, he is able to influence the king to take a man out of prison and bring him into his courts. And that's the type of influence when it's saying, because it would be easy for me to say, go up to whoever, I think Joe Biden's the president, but go up to the president and say, oh, I know someone that can help you, deal with whatever you're working on. And it's easy for him to turn me away. But for the cupbearer to say, there was someone that helped me out, and for the Pharaoh to listen, it shows that level of loyalty that he has, and that level of trust that he is delivering to the king, where the king trusts the cupbearer's wisdom and his advice. And it's because of that trust that Joseph is able to get out of prison and be able to save Egypt as it was. And then the other example of cupbearer being mentioned in the Bible, which was read from us this morning, was back in Nehemiah. So that last verse of Nehemiah 1, where it says, and Nehemiah was cupbearer to the king. A simple part, yet a simple part. There's no such thing as a simple part being added to the Bible. Everything in the Bible is there for a reason. So following up with that, I want to turn to Nehemiah chapter 2, verses 1 through 8. Because after it says that Nehemiah was cupbearer to the king, this is what Nehemiah does with that position of being cupbearer. So Nehemiah chapter 2, starting at verse 1 to 8. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was brought for him, I took the wine and gave it to the king. I had not been sad in his presence before, so the king asked me, why does your face look so sad when you are not ill? This can be nothing but sadness of heart. I was very much afraid, but I said to the king, may the king live forever. Why should my face not look sad when the city where my ancestors are buried lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire? The king said to me, what is it you want? Then I prayed to the God of heaven, and I answered the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me to the city in Judah where my ancestors are buried so that I can rebuild it. Then the king, with the queen sitting beside him, asked me, how long will your journey take, and when will you get back? It pleased the king to send me, so I set a time. I also said to him, if it pleases the king, may I have letters to the governors of the Trans-Euphrates, so that they will provide me safe conduct until I arrive in Judah. And may I have a letter to Asaph, keeper of the royal park, so that he will give me timber to make beams for the gates of the citadel by the temple, and for the city wall, and for the residence I will occupy. And because the gracious hand of my God was on me, the king granted my requests. So here, after we find out that Nehemiah is cupbearer, this is an exchange that he has with King Artaxerxes as he is presenting him the cup, the wine. So as part of his role, this is when he requests to return to Jerusalem to rebuild the city. And it's also important to know that Nehemiah was a foreigner. He was not raised over there. He resided back from Judah. That is where his family came from. Yet he still was able to rise to a great position of power within the courts of King Artaxerxes. And because of that position, he's able to ask him this request. But it's also important to know that he was afraid when asking this request. Even though he's in this position of great power, of great trust, of great loyalty, he is still a man, and he is still beneath the king. And even with that, even though he is afraid, he still had trust. And still, it says that he prayed to the God of heaven. He's asking God for advice, which is also a good message for us, that whenever we have fear, it's always important to pray. But because of his position, he's able to return to Jerusalem to rebuild the city. And not just be granted safe passage, but because of his position within the court, he also was able to request a letter to Asaph, keeper of the royal parks. That way he will be able to grant safe conduct. So it's not just, okay, you're free to go, but you're free to go, and here's how to get there safely, and I'll provide you beams of lumber so that you're able to start rebuilding the city. So a simple request initially, as it can seem, but it all starts within the position of being a cupbearer and having that type of loyalty and that level of trust with the king. So those are the couple of examples of being a cupbearers, but what does it have to do with us? And more specifically, if we're thinking about cupbearers nowadays, we don't necessarily go around handing out cups of wine everywhere we go, but a cup still has lots of significance and what's in the cup. So I actually want to turn to Matthew 10, verse 42, about what can be in the cup that we're offering up as a cupbearer. So Matthew 10, verse 42. And for this one, I think I am actually going to ask Joanna to come up again, and maybe your reward will be here. So as she's come up, I'll read Matthew 10, verse 42. And if anyone gives even a cup of cold water to one of these little ones who is my disciple, truly I tell you, that person will certainly not lose their reward. Would you consider yourself a little one? I would, even if you don't respond. So I have a cup of water for you. And that's the good water. It's not the yucky one. Is that reward what you're looking for? I didn't think so. That's okay, because even if that, for Joanna, that reward isn't what it is, it's the little actions, especially for the rewards for us. Because as something as small as a little cup of water for little ones, we will not lose our reward, because we're going out there and the little things having a big reward. Because we want to have the act of servitude, of servicing someone else, whether it be through offering up a cup of water to a little one, whether it be offering up a cup of wine to the king. It's that act of service. Another example of a cup is in Psalms 116. Verses 12 through 14. So Psalms 116, starting at verse 12. Talking about another type of cup. What shall I return to the Lord for all his goodness to me? I will lift up the cup of salvation and call on the name of the Lord. I will fulfill my vows to the Lord in the presence of all his people. So before we had a literal example of a cup of water, and here we have a metaphorical one, the cup of salvation. For everything that the Lord has given us, what shall we do in return? Offering up a cup of salvation, fulfilling our vows, and calling on the name of the Lord. And this cup of salvation, it represents God's greatest gift that he has given to us, which is salvation and the hope of salvation. And because of all the benefits that he gives us, this is how with all these benefits, we need to be giving our thanks and our love and offering up this hope of salvation, not just us, but for others. Because with all of our different job titles, job descriptions, positions within different companies, we want to be cupbearers. We want to be cupbearers to others. We want to be able to offer someone a cup when they're thirsty. We want to be able to, if that cup, we can symbolize it as being the good news. We want to offer up that good news to other people. And it's easy to do that when they're able to trust us. Because if they're able to trust us, similar as a king would trust his cupbearer, then that means that they're more willing to listen to what we have to say. So we want to be cupbearers to others, but most importantly, we want to be cupbearers for God. Because just as Nehemiah was a cupbearer to the king, Artaxerxes, we are cupbearers to our king, who is above, in heaven above. And as unimportant as it may seem, just on the outside, just being a cupbearer, we're supposed to be all these things, We want to be stewards of God's grace. We want to go out and proclaim the good news. So we want to be a cupbearer, but that's what we need to be doing. We need to be offering up the cup of salvation, as described by the psalmist, Psalm 116, for all of the goodness that the Lord has given us. We are still his servants, and it is because of that servitude that we need to offer everything that we have for us. Let that being represented in the cup. And based off of who we are and how, and the works, the faith, the actions that we have done for us, God can choose to accept the cup or not when we offer it to him, if he trusts us. And that choosing of acceptance will be determining of salvation or not, which I hope everyone is able to get through, because it's through our trust and our loyalty, which is a two-way street. We trust God, God trusts us. Hopefully that's the way. If there's any bit of doubts, then that's where we have to be able to iron it out. Because if the king even doubts for a second that the cupbearer was not being honest, then he's going to throw him in jail like he did back in Joseph's time. But it's that trust and loyalty that we're honored. It's a privilege. It's through God's grace that we're able to have the reward of his kingdom, which was made through his promise and through his covenant, which goes to the last type of cup in the Bible, one of the most important ones, the cup during the Last Supper. We think about, as we're going to take of the emblem soon, and this time when we're taking of it, we think about the bread that was broken for us. We think about the cup that was shared as to renew the covenant made for us. Because Jesus was preparing the cup for his death, but now we want to be preparing the cup for eternal life and have that type of thought process as we are taking of the cup. And every week when we're here, when we're taking the bread and the wine, this is when we're renewing our covenant, this cup of the Last Supper, and the covenant which was made back through the promises of Abraham, which is the promise of the kingdom. So I want to read one last verse from 1 Corinthians, typically read right before the emblems, but to get you thinking of exactly what this type of cup that we're offering up to the Lord. As we are cupbearers, this is what we are remembering. So 1 Corinthians 11, starting at verse 23 through 26. This is from Paul. For I received from the Lord what I also passed on to you. The Lord Jesus, on the night he was betrayed, took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, "This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way, after supper, he took the cup, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this whenever you drink it in remembrance of me. For whenever you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes."